Welcome to REST, which stands for Resiliency and Empowerment Seminar today. I am your host, Susan Gans. I am the founder and strategic advisor for Gans Strategic Solutions. We operate at the intersection of business and human behavior. This show is about hearing from leaders of small and mid-sized businesses, heads of nonprofits, and other community leaders. We hear their professional journeys, as well as what their mission of their organization is, and how they're being resilient, especially in these challenging times. I am delighted to have Nelson Tepfer today as our guest. He is founder of ProCFO Partners. Having worked in leadership roles across the finance function, Nelson's experience spans nearly a dozen industries, including manufacturing, healthcare, logistics, transportation, real estate, and online marketing sectors. Prior to founding ProCFO Partners, Nelson served in the roles of the CFO, interim CFO, and consulting, working with small and mid-sized businesses to achieve their strategic, financial, and operational goals. He earned an MBA in corporate finance, financial instruments and markets, and accounting from NYU Stern School of Business. With that, we welcome Nelson to the show.
Thank you, Susan, for that introduction.
You're welcome. So let's get into this. Tell us about the earlier part of your career, just taking a journey back, and how you got into the CFO work and then becoming an entrepreneur.
Sure. So going back to the very, very early days, back when I graduated from undergraduate degree, I'd actually been more interested in Wall Street. And that's where I was initially thinking how my career was going to take me. I had a few offers from some of the larger institutions down there. And then another opportunity came up in a small to mid-sized business. And I started very quickly rethinking, well, this seems like a really interesting opportunity. Okay. Now, whatever number of decades later, I took that opportunity. That actually led to one of my first CFO roles after I had grown in that organization. And from there led to a few other CFO roles and then into where I am today. So that actual transition happened more when I was the internal CFO of a company, jokingly back when I used to work for a living, when I was the CFO of this company. And a friend of mine reached out and said a friend of his is having some trouble with his company. Can I have a conversation and see if I can help? And that conversation turned into a year-long interim CFO role. But what I found by doing that, as anyone who starts doing any type of consulting, is you're able to have such a greater impact on a company like that, as opposed to being internal, learned an entirely new company, new industry, and the skills which were second nature in the previous role and what you need to do on a day-to-day basis in the previous role is so much more impactful on a company like this. So I said, okay, great. How can I do more of this? So from there, I said, okay, I wanted to help more and more companies like this. I truly enjoyed having this impact. I enjoyed learning a new company, and I enjoyed really being able to help them succeed and overcome the challenges they were facing when they first brought me in. So I started doing that. I did that on my own for close to 7.5 years, working in a whole bunch of different industries, companies ranging in size from the funded startups pre-revenue up to several hundred million in revenue. Really focused on helping them really grow up, I guess, internally from their finance and accounting operation. Is just get to that next level to support the next phase of growth. At that point, I decided I was looking into ways of doing this bigger and better. Doing it on your own has a lot of its own challenges. Anyone who's tried doing any type of consulting on their own has certainly overcome them. The feast or famine, you only have your own experience. It's difficult to develop and deliver at the same time. So I looked at ways of doing this bigger and better. I did try it with a larger organization. And after spending a couple of years there, I kind of just felt it wasn't good enough. They weren't helping they weren't supporting their CFOs and helping their clients good enough. So I said, well, if this isn't good enough, how can we do this better? Is this the best we can do this? Which led me to form my own organization in which we are now nearly 20 CFOs strong, providing this part-time CFO service.
So what I take from your journey is that you're constantly learning, right? You're learning new organizations, new industries, and new people. So how do you tackle all of these changes over time? How have you learned to adapt?
Well, for me, a lot of it really comes down to identifying the common threads between most of us. And it truly exists when you're working with a company in the manufacturing space and then working with a company in the real estate space. So there are nuances to each industry, that's for certain. But the underlying aspects of the information and the insight they need to make decisions doesn't really change. Some of the inputs may change, but the structure of how to create that format to give them the insight that they're looking for doesn't change. So it's okay, this aspect that you need to make this kind of decision that you need to right now, it's the same thing as helping to build this function that will allow you to make this decision over here in an entirely different industry. Lifelong learner is probably a very good, a pretty apropos definition for both myself and most of my team. It's just, it's always looking for more and how can we do this better and best. You know, the day you stop learning is unfortunately usually the day you're no longer, no longer living. Until that point, every day you live and learn something new. So it's just it's truly something we all live and breathe, and it's really helped us help our clients in achieving their goals.
So, were there any mentors or sponsors being advocates for you along the way in your career? Can you talk about that?
Mm, Probably my father had one of the greatest impacts, and a lot of it had to do with, so many students who are scholastically outstanding, who achieve a lot scholastically, are unfortunately very often tend to settle as things get, keep going because they know they can always achieve this level, so it's only okay. And he was one who always who drove into me is, if that's not your best, that's not good enough. It doesn't matter what the number says it is. If that's not your best, you can do better. So how do we make it better? And then that truly has been a very big driving force in a lot of what I do.
So it sounds like he was the one that was behind continuous improvement throughout your career.
Yeah,
Just as you got comfortable, you probably had your dad's voice in the back of your head saying,
absolutely.
"Can we
Is
do
this the
this
best you can
better?
do?
Is this
Is
the
this the
best?"
best you can do? Yeah, absolutely. And it is. So, which of course comes with its own challenges because then it's never the best you can do because there's always things that you can be doing better. But at the same time, I do believe it is a driving force. And I think it's a very necessary force that most of us tend to dismiss.
Yes, absolutely. And what sort of changes have you seen in your experience with business? What sorts of things have you seen change? I mean, there's some basic structure you said that's common, but I'm sure that you've seen changes over time. Can you talk about that and how you've dealt with that?
Absolutely. Sure. So what I have found, even just in the role of the CFO, there's been a tremendous change from when I started doing this kind of work to where it exists today. In my first CFO role, I remember jokingly referring to my responsibility as making sure as much money as possible comes in and as little as possible goes out. These days, the CFO is far more responsible for actually driving the goals and the growth of the company. You're not just a gatekeeper anymore. You have to actually be the strategist and the catalyst for the growth. It's just that's certainly an interesting dynamic I've seen evolve over time. In addition, the role calls for more interaction with far more than just the finance and accounting because the goals become more company-wide instead of just finance and accounting specific. So whether it's sales goals, revenue targets, and how that structure gets built, but the CFO very often is called into more of those operations, even sales calls. The finance and accounting function is now called in to inform a lot more of those conversations as well. Businesses as a whole is always evolving. You can point especially now, we're certainly seeing that from day-to-day businesses evolving. So there's certainly quite a bit of few changes we've seen over the years. Absolutely.
And that brings me to your question. What has been your biggest challenge, if you will, as an entrepreneur and going from internal work to then a consultant to now actually overseeing and rolling up your sleeves and doing the work of a CFO?
So going from internal to external is certainly a shift. But I truly believe it's not as large a shift for those who always had this mindset of looking for doing things better. Because once that's there, that's like, okay, I have this one company I'm working with, as opposed to now we're working with dozens of companies to along the same lines. What is their problem, and how can we help them solve the solution? The challenge in switching from internal to external often exists in the buy-in from the rest of the organization, but we have ways of tackling that very early on that helps them recognize what our role is, that we're truly there to support the growth and the goals of the organization and the business owner, which makes a lot of that challenge, pretty easily to overcome, as long as it's addressed in the right way when we start.
So I want to ask further about getting buy-in, because that to me is often where a lot of work needs to get done when you have an outside force coming in and why should we listen to you? This has
So I
been
can give you
tried,
some great examples of that
right?
one. Sure. Yeah. So, a good example of something like that, what I'm referring to, is before starting to work with a client recently, the business owner asked us to speak to their controller before, almost as like another gatekeeper type of thing. Should we go ahead or
Yes.
not? And naturally, the conversation started. The controller was concerned. Well, what are we actually going to do? I mean, he, in many ways, and it's perfectly understandable, is concerned. Well, how is this going to affect me? How is this going to,
Yes.
what's this going to mean for me if you step into this, part-time CFO role? And from my perspective, the conversation very quickly centered around to, well, how can we help you do your job better? That's my responsibility. We're not there to do anything to your role. It's how can we help you succeed in this role? And in that particular instance, we're actually shifting his role and responsibility to more of a general manager one, because he actually does have a higher level of skill to actually manage more. And we're going to be bringing in more accounting and support help for him to oversee.
So that's amazing. So what I hear in that story is actually your father's voice comes through to say, how can we help you do your job better? And then you're actually up leveling his skill and his roles and responsibilities to say, hey, you don't have to do this. You can use some other skills that you have that with bringing in some other people will allow you to do that. That's very freeing, I can imagine.
I mean, there's obviously a lot involved in building that function underneath him to still
Of
support the
course.
company as well. But that's what we shifted our focus to, because his level of experience and expertise allowed him to take on that larger role.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some of the themes of our show today, which is about resiliency. Can you speak to how you've been resilient in the past and what you're doing today to be resilient?
Well, the CFO role is probably perhaps best defined by resiliency, because we're the ones who have to adapt to everything that happens. 2001, 2008, anything that happens, we're the ones who have to sit there and say, okay, how do we get through this? What is our plan for what we're doing to get through this? So, by the very nature of our role, we're the ones who have to plan our way through every crisis that pops up. Now, those are the overarching crises, but in the business world, there's a crisis every day, not every day, hopefully. But our business crises that pop up on a regular basis, which from our perspective, it's okay, how do we do this and how do we plan through this? And truly successful CFOs don't even see it as resilient, they see it as Tuesday.
Right. It's just another day in the life.
It's just another day. This came up. How do we adapt to it? Which really brings us to really where we are today and what we're working on with many of our clients in adapting to today's environment, talking about being resilient. These business owners are truly perhaps epitomize that far more than any of us can with how they're adapting. But we're getting involved in some of these conversations where their main line of business was shut down. Within 3 days of we had a a strategy session where we planned for launching a separate business that they can offer to their current clients, which was up and running inside of 10 days.
Wow.
So there are conversations like that happening throughout our client base on a regular basis. It's like, okay, this changed. How do we do this now to support everyone we're working with in our own network? For instance, we had a company that was in the distribution space where what they had been distributing was restaurants. And that pretty much changed overnight. So they shifted, okay, well, we have this infrastructure. What else can we distribute? And it became distributing PPE, became distributing other essential types of goods and services, delivering meals to, pre-made meals to different things. So the resiliency that we've seen, exemplified by so many of our clients is truly astounding.
That's amazing. What do you think are the attributes or factors that are helping some of these companies successfully pivot? Like, what's almost secret ingredients or not so secret ingredients to
Well, I'd like to
successfully
say it's
pivot?
us, but it's certainly not us, obviously. A lot of it comes down to their own perspectives and how well they can recognize what the challenge is. It's not just, oh, I just need to get until June 15th and everything will go back to normal. It's what's next? What's actually happening? How are we going to move ahead to whatever this environment looks like? What are the opportunities here? The ones who, pretty much just stick their head down and say, okay, we'll get through this, we'll get through this, we'll get through this, unfortunately, we're the ones who are going to suffer most for it, because without adaptation to what's actually going on out there, it's certainly going to be challenging. I believe many of those companies will still get through it, but it's certainly going to present a more challenging environment if they're not adapting, if they're not pivoting to what's actually going on around them right now.
It seems that, by acknowledging the situation, you're not like sweeping it away. You're saying, this is the situation, let's face it. And then let's create a space to brainstorm, to think about what are our core skill sets, and then how can we apply those core core skill sets to create opportunities and make opportunities for ourselves, right?
Absolutely. And a simple exercise along the lines of that, which again, most business owners, the really good ones get it instantly when we bring up this type of perspective, is like, if you were starting your business today, what would you do?
Yeah.
You have this in place, everything is here. And as opposed to, well, this is what we've done in the past.
Right.
And unfortunately, that perspective is in many cases hindering. Not always, obviously, because many of them have great infrastructure and have everything in place that works wonderfully. But in many cases, we find that type of perspective limiting. Well, this is what we did, so now this is what we're going to keep going with. But as opposed to right now, if you were starting from scratch, what would you be doing? Or how would you be doing this? And then it becomes, okay, we can identify that. So then it becomes, okay, how do we actually go and do it?
So let's talk about mindset for a moment. How do you get somebody into a positive mindset, or how do you suggest that people get into a positive mindset instead of, their limiting beliefs perhaps getting in the way?
So the first step is for the first, obviously recognize it. So we have a bunch of different ways where we frame that conversation. The one I just gave you was a typical one of them, but we've
Got
actually
it.
had conversations with a company where they were literally reorganizing their entire company around one employee, and they weren't really recognizing they were doing this. So we were literally drawing out the new org chart on a whiteboard, and I walked up to the whiteboard in the middle of this meeting and erased the whole whiteboard. And I said, look, same thing. We're starting right now. What's the organization you want to build? And within 30 seconds, this business owner walks up and literally draws out the entire org chart clearly, because he had a picture in his mind of what he wants it to be. And I said, great, let's go build that. And he turns to me and says, well, what about this person? I said, you tell me. You just drew this out of what this looks like. So the mindset, those eureka and aha moments come from when that mindset shifts. And it's getting them to recognize that this is what's required to look ahead, to build the bigger picture towards creating what comes next.
Yes. And giving them their power back, right? Because I think some of the things that people are experiencing now is that they feel that they don't have control. And yes, there's so many uncertainties, but there's also so many things that they can control. So can you talk more about empowerment?
Sure. The things that we've seen these business owners are able to control, well, even just people joining our team at the moment is certainly an example of that, where they're seeing an opportunity with whatever they're coming from to joining just my company. We've had some very interesting conversations around that. But with the clients we're working with, what we're seeing in businesses, that control very quickly comes after that perspective change. Whereas as soon as they get this, oh, this is what this really means, or oh, this is what's actually happening, they say, okay, great, we can go and do this. Once they have that mindset shift, they become empowered to actually go ahead and effect those changes that they see as necessary. The one I just mentioned previously, where his main business was shut down.
Yes.
Sure. 3 days later, we had a conversation. It's, okay, therefore what? You have all of these client relationships. You know all of these customers. What are the other things we've always been in the back of your mind that we can create and help them with? And the conversation was a very, very quick one. Within a minute or two, he identified this. So of course, it went up on the board. And we were, after that conversation, we said, this was the winner and let's go do it. But it was very quick, recognition that, oh, I can do this. I've always wanted to do this. This was always in the back of my mind, somewhere floating around. Now we can actually, talk about it and actually put words to it and actually go ahead and take a plan of, and build a plan of action around it. So a lot of it comes down to, yes, it's the perspective, because that change in perspective, up to your point, absolutely brings their empowerment to be able to actually do something about it.
Yes, and it sounds like, you're that trusted confidant that, I can, in the CEOs, C-suite that I work with, sometimes it's about having a colleague to be able to bounce off an idea to get out what's in their head that maybe they don't have that person to talk to. Is that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. And it's just very common knowledge. It's really lonely at the top. And that CEO, business owner, doesn't want to bring they don't have anyone in the company they can talk to about the issues or what their concerns are. And they don't very often want to bring it home to their spouse to do the complain about all the issues that they're facing, type of thing. So absolutely, we very often become that confidant, that trusted advisor to they turn to say, okay, well, what about this? And what are we thinking about this type of thing? Or this plan of action we've been discussing, what do you think about this? So that is certainly the scenario where we very often step into that role.
And that brings to mind a question really too about self-care, because I see a lot of business owners, there's so much going on in their professional lives, and they have family, then they have community, and there's just a lot of pressure and stress. So what are your own self-care routines, if you want to share that, or what do you advise your clients relative to this topic?
Well, it's always easier to talk about the advice we give others than what we do for ourselves. So let's go with that one. But when we've had the conversations, believe it or not, we are very big proponents. It's not the type of thing you would think a CFO would be advising, but taking the vacations that come up.
Yes.
We've had conversations. Oh, I haven't taken a vacation in 2 years, and so talking about that trusted advisor role and stuff. Why? What do you think is going to happen if you step away for a week? That week that you're going to need to recharge or stuff like that. I've had clients recently step away. They're seeing what's happening now, and in many ways, they're finding that more freeing. Is like, I don't need to be involved in day to day. See, it's running without me actually there and stuff like that. And
Yes.
that's allowing them to envision what that looks like moving forward and the opportunities that presents for them moving forward. So I do truly believe every single business owner should be stepping away from their business at some points in time. I don't think their mind's going to turn off from their business. I don't expect it to. But
No.
stepping away actually very often helps them achieve a greater level of insight, because it's not the things that are right in front of them that's taking away their attention while they're
Yes.
on the beach, while they're skiing, while they're doing whatever it is that helps that they actually enjoy. They will come back with something new that they've learned about their business just from stepping away from it.
Yes. And so before we end our conversation today, what would you like people to remember from our conversation today?
Perhaps one of the biggest ones is the issues most business owners face. While they feel unique and overpowering and all encompassing to many business owners, they are not. And there is expert advice that you can find that will help you to overcome them. Is probably perhaps the biggest one, because that's one of the first conversations we have with them. And it's just so, I can't tell you how many times we've gotten the sigh of relief when walking out of just the first introduction, like, oh, you mean this is normal? This is common? And it's absolutely, it is. These issues many business owners face, the underlying issues are truly common. How they need to tackle it, or the things that are nuanced to their business, obviously that's specific to them. But the underlying issues are common, and there are plenty of solutions out there.
Yes, and I think that what you give them is that feeling that they're not alone on many levels. They're not alone because you have a team that you're bringing in to help, and then they're not alone because their issues, the thematics you've seen before, and it's common. So I really thank you for the conversation today, Nelson. How can people find you? Because I want them to find you.
Sure. Our website is www.procfopartners.com, or you can look up me, Nelson Tepfer, on LinkedIn. Happy to accept any connections or have any conversations to see how we can help.
Fantastic. So I'm going to repeat that. That's www.procfopartners.com, or Nelson Tepfer on LinkedIn. I so appreciate the conversation today, the insights, and the question from your dad about, is this the best that you can do? Because now I have that ringing in the back of my head. And to our audience, I so appreciate you listening to our conversation, and we look forward to seeing you in the next conversation.